Welcome to the first masterclass of the year. My goodness, this is such a big class. I think 1,400 of you signed up, which is absolutely enormous amount. Before we get into the class, what I'm going to do is just give a bit of an overview of how this is going to work, because I know a lot of you have been on my courses before, my classes, and some of you haven't. So this is a bit different to how I usually do classes. Usually you can talk to each other in the chat, the webinar chat. I have disabled the chat. The main reason is when I did a class like this last time, I just completely was getting distracted by the amount of people in the class talking in the chat. However, you can talk to me via the chat, so I will see any messages in the chat, but obviously it's a big class, so I might find it difficult to stay on top of it. If you have a question throughout the class, please do use the Q&A function within the webinar rather than the chat, just so I can use that and keep an eye on things. Again, because the class is so big with so many people, I'm not going to get to answer every single question, unfortunately. But if there's something that I don't answer, then please feel free to message me after the class, and then we can chat there. So and also just to say, actually, so this is being recorded. And you will all get a copy of the recording, but it won't be for a few weeks yet. And the reason why is because the track that I'm going to vocal mix today is for a record label, and the track isn't released yet. And so I don't want to release the recording until the track has been released. So it's just for copyright issues. So yeah, vocal mixing. I've said this to many of my students who've been on my courses before. It is so difficult to mix. Mixing is hard, and it takes many, many years in which to develop the experience, the ear, the judgment, in which to get really good professional level mixers. And I think that a lot of people think that they can just absorb all the knowledge of mixing and then be able to mix at a professional level. It's one of those things you have to put the work in. You have to mix and mix and mix to develop that experience to be good at. And the thing with vocal mixing is that it's probably one of the hardest things to do, because if you listen to the records in the charts, that is exactly the sound that you want to go for a lot of the time. You want those vocals to sound pristine and clear and smooth. And, dare I say it, but unfortunately, a lot of vocals these days in the modern charts do lack a bit of, shall we say, dynamics. There's a lot of auto tune, there is a lot of formulation. So there's a few techniques that we can use just to make your vocal sound modern, like it should sound like off the radio. It does come down to how well you record that vocal. Unfortunately, if you don't record your vocal good enough in the studio, if you don't record it dry, if you don't have a fairly decent microphone and a fairly decent preamp, then it is a challenge in the mixing. But with enough experience and the right tools, you can get any vocal sounding top notch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to go straight into it. I'm still recovering from a cold, actually, so bear with me if I sound a bit snuffly. Also, just to say as well, is I've got my headphones on. I would advise you guys to put your headphones on if you've got headphones, so that you can also hear some of the nuances of what I'm going to be doing. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through my vocal chain and how I mix vocals. So just to say as well, if anyone's experiencing any kind of technical challenges, etc., the chance are it's going to be a problem your end, because I've got my headphones on. I'm going through this system, so I'm hearing exactly what you can hear. So if you're having any challenges, it's probably your connection that end. So just want to say that everything's sounding good from this end at the minute. But of course, if you do have any problems, do use the webinar chat to let me know. So this is a track here that I have co-written with a singer, and produced and mixed it, and it's going to be released by BMG USA, I believe. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go through her vocals today, and this track has already been mixed, it's already been signed off and delivered to the label, but we're just kind of going to go through how I got the vocal sound. First of all, let's just play a little bit of the track so you get an idea for the sound and what it sounds like kind of post mix. So we'll go from the pre-chorus. Also, just to say, this is Logic Pro for those who are not familiar with it, and to say, don't worry if you use Ableton, FL Studio, Pro Tools, whatever it may be. It doesn't matter, because the techniques I'm going to show you today is basically plugin based, so you can replicate it very easily in the DAW of your choice. So let's just play a little bit of this.
Here we go, falling into our no. Oh, I feel it, and then keep you close or I get vertigo. Oh, I feel it again. Here we go, falling into our no. Oh, I feel it, and then keep you close or I get vertigo. Oh, I feel it again. Oh, I feel it, I'm falling back
Okay, so it's kind of like a modern dance pop. These tracks have been written specifically with Love Island in mind, so kind of going for that contemporary kind of sound. Now, the singer, Georgia, absolutely incredible vocalist, she recorded her vocals at home and sent them to me. So that's how I work a lot of the time with artists. And, you know, I'd prefer to have artists in my studio with me, but, you know, that's not always possible. But it is more difficult to mix vocals like this because you are not in control of the quality of the recording. But I just want you to take a look at this purple file here. This is her lead vocal, and then all these other purpley bits here are her backing vocals. So she's layered a lead vocal, some ad-libs over here, and then we've got some harmonies, some vocal doubles, which we'll go through, and some harmonies. And we've got like a choir effect going on the title of the track, Vertigo, as well. And when she delivered the files to me, I kind of like how she had mixed the vocals in her demo, and so I decided to kind of, you know, build on what she'd already done. So, you know, credit to Georgia. But as you can see from the WAV, if we zoom in a bit, actually, I'd have to take flex off, so just bear with me a minute. If you have a look at this here, this is where the verse is. She sings quieter, and then we get to the chorus and the drop, and she sings more powerful. So if we listen to the softer version.
You are my wild night, you are my sunrise, yeah, you are my fire, the only spark in this room.
So straight away I'm looking at that and I know that she's a dynamic singer. She's got power, she can sing quietly, and you know, a lot of singers are like that. Some singers sing the same all the way through, same volume, but with vocalists like this, they do need a lot of processing when you come to mix the vocals, particularly with compression. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through my vocal chain, and my vocal chain changes all the time. So if you've been on a course of mine, you know, you might see some familiar plugins here, but you might see some new ones because I'm constantly evolving my chain. So this is the chain, and I'm just going to turn everything off so we can kind of start at the beginning. Okay, and I'm going to solo her vocal. Let me turn that off. So just say these vocals here have been tuned in Melodyne, which is this here. So I will have imported all of them into here and made sure they were all in tune with each other and they were all in time with each other. But as you can see, for those who use Logic, I've also done some timing here because these vocals here, the backing vocals, went tight in time with the lead vocal, and for modern tracks like this they really do need to be in time, or it's going to stick out. So let's listen to her vocal in solo. Let's just go to where she sings with a bit more power.
Floating up.
Just let me, if I got automation on, I have. So I'm just going to turn it up a little bit.
Floating up here with the stars and moon. Now eyes floating up here with the stars and moon.
So, you know, it's a fairly decent recording, actually. I mean, I've had much, you know, worse vocals to work off, and Georgia always delivers a really good vocal. You can hear, if you've got headphones on, that she has recorded her vocals in a room that isn't acoustically treated. So it's not completely dry in there, which means that she's picked up some room ambience on her vocal.
Me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
It's very, very subtle, but it's there. So if you are in this position where you're recording vocals at home and your studio is not acoustically treated professionally, it isn't all kitted out, it doesn't sound dry, you can make it as dry as possible by just doing something as simple as making sure there's carpets in the room, there's much furniture as possible to absorb the sound. But if you're really struggling, I've started to use this a lot recently. It's the Waves Clarity VXD reverb, and what it does is it removes any reverb from the vocals. So if someone has recorded vocals and there's a lot of natural echo on that vocal, this will get rid of it. So if I just kind of take it to default settings.
On me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
And then what I'm going to do is you just click on here to singing. You take this all the way round, and now it will remove any reverb from that vocal.
On me floating up here with the on me floating up here with on me floating.
Hardly anything. It's a very, very subtle difference because it's, she's got some kind of treatment in that room. But what it does by getting rid of the ambience on that vocal is it's making the vocal sound dry. And if you're after a modern vocal sound, you need your vocals to sound as dry as possible, and this will do it for you. It'll get rid of that. And it's kind of a cheap plugin, but if you're working with vocalists who so many people record vocals at home now, but they don't understand the importance of acoustic treatment. This will just kind of make your vocals sound instantly like they've been recorded in a pro studio. So that's great. Now the next thing that I will do on every single instrument, and those who've been on my courses know this inside out because I've been drilling it home for the last couple of years, but I always start every single instrument, including the vocals, with what's called a surgical EQ. And a surgical EQ is basically to fix any problems across the frequency spectrum in these vocals. So this is the treatment that I did on the vocal originally. I'm going to take this back to default. So just a quick recap on here for people who are a bit unsure of what EQ is and what it does, because it is an absolutely crucial mixing tool. This is the FabFilter Pro Q3. You can use any EQ plugin for this. In Logic, you've got the channel EQ, or the Beach Ball from Death. That's just what we want. So you can use the channel EQ plugin in Logic and it will do the trick. Here it is, exactly the same. I like the Pro Q3 and I'll show you why in a second. But nearly all EQ plugins are basically the human listening range. So down here at the bottom we've got 20 hertz, and up at the top here we've got 20 kilohertz. Okay, this is the human hearing range. So we can't hear any lower than 20 hertz, and we can't hear any higher than 20 kilohertz at the other end of the spectrum. So it makes sense that we would have an EQ plugin that is within the listening range. If you do a hearing test, which you can do via soundgym.co, you can do it for free via, I think it's called the doctor test or something like that, ear doctor. You can do a test and it tells you what the highest frequency is that you can hear up to. For me, I can only hear up to about, I think, top of my head, around 12 kilohertz, which is around here. So I can't hear all the frequencies up here, because as we get older we hear less frequencies. So anyway, back to it. So the aim with surgical EQ, it's always the very first actual processing plugin in my chain. So if I'm working on drums, bass, synths, vocals, guitars, pianos, whatever it is, this is the first thing that I will work on. And you can do this, you can do EQ before compression or you can do it after compression. The problem is if you use your EQ after compression, you are kind of undoing all the good work that you've done with the compressor, basically. So it makes a lot of sense to me to put the EQ before the compressor, but there's no right or wrong when it comes to mixing it, only what you prefer. And the very first thing I will do on every single vocal is this. I'm going to double click and I'm going to take this all the way up to about 90. And I know it's 90 because it's got it there, 90 hertz. So what I've done here is removed, this is called a high pass, otherwise known as a low cut. I have removed up to 90 hertz of sound from the vocal. This is a female vocalist, right? And at 90 hertz and below is where your bass and your kick drum sit. There is no point in having her vocal sitting in this range, in this EQ. All it's going to do is muddy up the mix. Every other instrument is going to have information here. Guitars, synths, pianos, everything is going to sit in this space. And if we don't treat this area, your kick and your bass will struggle to come through the mix, and you're going to have a muddy sounding low end. So vocals is a very, very good one in which to do this, because if we press play, if I just kind of go like this, let's play a vocal again.
On me floating up here with the stars and moon, now eyes on.
Okay, see all this down here?
On me floating up here with the stars and moon, now
Look at all that there. That she has got a lot of super low end information coming from her microphone that is not adding to her vocal performance. That is just going to cloud the kick and the bass. That is actually a lot. That comes from the microphone that she's using, which I think off the top of my head is the Shure SM7, which is this microphone I've got here for this class. It's not a microphone I would ever personally use for vocal recordings, because it's a dynamic microphone, and dynamic microphones are not as they can't cope with the vast amount of sound and dynamics that a condenser mic can. A condenser mic can pick up all this extra musical information. So I personally wouldn't use it for vocals, but that's probably why there's a lot of bass on this. So we don't need this. So let's go up to 90. Now, the reason why I've gone up to 90 is because if I go any further, if I start going up to, say, 150, I could be taking some of the tone away from her vocals. That would be especially true on male vocals. With male vocals, to be honest, I tend to do a cut on the vocals, not so high, probably up to around 60 or 70 hertz. But as a guide, I very rarely go over 90 on lead vocals. So that has now cleaned up the low end, and we're just going to take a listen to it before and after, and you'll hear there's no difference in the quality of her vocal. So this is with no EQ.
on me floating up here with the stars and moon, now eyes
And on.
only photographing you are. I'm barely breathing, praying, believing.
Okay, so it's got rid of low end information. It's not affecting her tone. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is look for problematic frequencies in her vocal. Now, this is very important to do this on vocals, because dynamics and frequencies are just so vastly different compared to every singer. So you can't use presets. Don't use presets, whatever you do, when you are dealing with instruments, live instruments or vocals. You know, I could easily go down here. I don't even know if I've got presets in this, have I? So I could go down to oh, here we go, vocal, and look at what it's done.
On me floating up.
That's not going to do anything for me. So presets, they just can't cope with the vast changes in these vocals. So, you know, you need to use your ear. So there we go, up to my 90 again. All right, let's play the vocal, and I'll show you what the Pro Q3 does.
On me floating up.
I'm going to hover my mouse over the waveform.
On me floating up here with the stars and moon, now
Okay, and it takes this freeze frame shot. So now I'm going to be able to you know, see what is happening at a point in time in the vocal. Now, it's not that I want a smooth I'm not looking for all of this waveform here to be smooth right across. Okay, it doesn't work like that. What I'm looking for is any frequencies that really spike up or spike, you know, or there's a big gap, basically. One of the things that you could do, shameless plug here, but for those who are not aware, this is my core frequency chart. When I was learning mixing, there was nowhere online that would tell me where the vocals should sit in this frequency spectrum. I'm like, okay, where should the vocals be here? Where should the kick be? Where should the snare be? So I designed a chart myself, and as you can see down here, I've put that the vocals sit generally between 100 hertz and 12 kilohertz. So look right across the bottom, huge amount of space in the frequency spectrum, and look at all the other instruments it could clash with: piano, acoustic guitar, electric guitar, synths, up here at the cymbals, a bit of the snare. And if we don't treat all of these individual instruments, they're all going to mask each other, And if they mask each other, then we're going to lose clarity in our mix. And the reason why it's important to address this with vocals is because, look, it takes up a massive part of the frequency spectrum. It starts all the way really around here, 100 hertz for, you know, a lot of male singers, and can go really, really high. So, you know, this is a good guide for me and for anyone who's learning as well. So I know that core frequencies of vocals, just by experience, okay, we've got middle frequencies here from around 200 to 1 kilohertz. So this little group here are quite important frequencies for vocals, where you want body in the vocal. So like that kind of thickness in the vocal that makes a modern kind of pop vocal sound quite thick and intimate. And then we've got sibilance, which is the S's, which can be really problematic, particularly in female vocals. They tend to sit between 4 kilohertz up here and can go all the way up to about 10 or 12. So these are the things that I'm looking at. But what I tend to do, first of all, I do my high pass on vocals. And then for modern pop vocals, so with a track like this, which is kind of modern pop, I apply what's called a shelf, high shelf. So we go down to shape, high shelf there. And we go like this. Not quite the shape I was after, but it'll do for now. So what this is doing is boosting the high frequencies. These are called the air frequencies. So if we look at the core frequency chart, between 12 to 20 kilohertz is your air frequencies. You know, when you listen to a vocal in the charts and it's got this like airy, like sparkly kind of sound to it that we're so used to hearing in the charts now, that is where those frequencies sit. So I tend to apply a high shelf boost, is what it's called, around the top end. And then all I'm doing now is looking for problems. So let's look for these problems.
On me floating up here with the stars and moon.
Okay, so with the Pro Q3, it will come up with those little orange tags there telling me which frequencies are kind of popping out a bit. Depending on the instrument, you may want them to pop out, but, you know, and a vocal is really dynamic. So, you know, there's going to be vocal things popping out all over the place. But that one there, 1.3 kilohertz, is a bit of a spiky one. And you don't want one frequency popping out because it will kind of... it will be obvious in the mix. It can also be shrill to the listener. So I'm just going to click on that. I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to use Q, which stands for quality factor, which is basically the width of my cut. So I just want to do a narrow cut there of that frequency. And all that's going to do is bring that frequency that's popping out there and make it soothes it. It makes it a bit more, you know, chill. Basically chill. Now by doing that and cutting that, it will affect the frequencies next to it. So I've got to now make sure what the impact is of that decision on the other frequencies.
Me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
So now 931 hertz is popping out a bit as a result of that. So again, I'm just going to do a little cut. I'm going to make it a bit narrower using the Q, just a little one.
Me floating up here with the stars and moon now. Eyes only photograph.
Okay, one thing that I'm noticing, so I think there's this rule in mixing that you should cut rather than boost frequencies, because if you boost frequencies, you will adding volume. If you got down here, look, this is how much volume you're adding. So by me doing this high shelf boost in the air frequencies, +3 it says there, I've added 3 decibels of volume to my mix. And if you do that all over the place, it affects something called gain staging. And when you get to the end of the mixing process, well, everything could distort. But that's a whole other subject. But let me go back to
floating up here with the stars and moon now. Eyes only photo.
Okay, there's a bit of a gap here. These are important frequencies for female vocalists. See this gap? It's not big, but there's a bit of lack of frequencies there. And, you know, they're towards the upper end, probably where, you know, the sibilance will sit. So maybe it's not a bad thing, but I feel like it needs a bit of a boost of frequencies here just to make it a bit more level with the two groups to the left and the right. So I'm going to double click there. I'm already going into the shelf here now. Just going to make it a bit narrower.
Me floating up here with the stars and moon now. Eyes only photographing you. I'm barely breathing. Me floating up here with the stars and moon.
So as you can see, you got to constantly change things, because as you're boosting, other things are coming up and down.
On me floating up here with the stars and moon. Now eyes are only photographing you.
Okay, so I would leave that for now. I'd look at that and think, okay, that sounds okay to me. We can turn it off and on.
On me floating
Off.
up here with the stars and moon. Now eyes are only.
Okay, so when I turn it on, it sounds a bit brighter. It doesn't sound too shrill low. It doesn't sound too brittle. Just a nice extra bit of brightness. So off again.
On me floating up here with the stars and moon.
And on.
Now eyes are only photographing you.
Okay, now by listening to that, I can already hear, as she's singing this bit here, you can hear that this last bit here is louder than the rest. Listen. So here.
Stars and moon, now eyes are only photographing you.
So this is where we move on. Well, actually, before I do that, I'm going to do de-essing, actually. So a de-esser. Now, this is a kind of EQ, essentially. So I've talked about sibilance. That's basically S's. And in vocalists, some of them have really strong S sounds. And they can sound really harsh in the mix, where you're listening to the track and it's like, ooh, that is really harsh sounding S's. So we could do that via EQ. I could do what's called a notch filter, which is basically not like that. If you go here and you go to notch and you make it narrow and you sweep the frequency spectrum like this, looking for where the S sits. And as I said, for female vocalists, it will sit somewhere between 4 kilohertz up to about 12 kilohertz. For male vocals, it goes a bit lower. It can go down to 2 kilohertz up to about 6 kilohertz. And then once the S's disappear or soften, you know you're in the right place. So you could use your EQ like this. The only problem is that the S's don't play all the way through a vocal, do they? It's only when they sing the S. So we only want to affect those S's. So we could do something called dynamic EQ, which in here, you know, what you can do is just basically right click and go make dynamic, and then you set a range like this. And then basically what happens is only when the S is activated, when it hits a certain volume level, it will reduce the frequency. But I particularly wouldn't use very often the dynamic EQ approach when I'm doing a de-essing. To make life easier for everyone, we have de-esser plugins. They just do this stuff for you dead easily. Now, I've got a couple of de-esser plugins that I've used. A lot of you have seen me using the FabFilter Pro DS, but I've kind of fallen out of love with it a little bit because I was getting some kind of side effects on the audio on the non-S parts, and so I didn't quite like it. So now I've moved on to this from SSL themselves, called DS, and you basically, you know, set up here the range. So, you know, I can't remember exactly where her Sibilance was when I did this, but, you know, as I said, female vocals tend to be between 4 and all the way up to maybe about 12, but we'll try a narrower. So you set the limit here basically, and it's telling you here, and then, you know, how much we don't want to go over 100, and then the threshold. So this is kind of like the point in volume at which you know, the DS will start working. So you've got to use your ears with DS. So there's no way around it. So we need to find a couple of S's here.
The stars.
There's one. Actually, she doesn't sound that bad without the DS.
The stars.
So some people just have S's that sound okay. However, we haven't applied the compression or the tonal EQ yet. Once that goes on, the S's might sound way more prominent. So for now, I'm just kind of going to do a little bit of de-essing. So
the stars and moon.
And we're kind of looking at the gain reduction, GR.
The stars and
gain reduction basically means how much volume I'm losing of these S's.
The stars and moon.
There you go. It's going between 3 and 4
The stars.
decibels.
The stars and moon now. 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 The stars and moon now.
If you take de-essing too far, the vocalist will sound like they've got a lisp. Okay, once you're in the lisp territory, you know it's too much.
The stars and moon now. The stars and moon now. The stars.
So can you hear that? I've kind of taken everything to the extreme so you can hear. She's got a lisp now. Listen.
The stars and moon now, the stars and moon.
So we don't want that.
The stars and moon now, the stars and moon now, the stars and moon now, the stars and.
Okay, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. Her S's are sounding good anyway. She doesn't have a particularly harsh natural sibilance. So someone's asking what the Clarity VX plugin. I assumed you signed on late because we've already been through that one. So yeah, sorry, I can't go back to that one because we're up against it. So next I'm going to do my compression, and if you really want to learn anything from today, this is going to be it, right? Compression is so hard to learn, and it takes many years of thousands, okay, maybe not thousands, hundreds of mixers to develop an ear to know what the hell you're doing. But there's some techniques that I use. So recently in my vocal chain, I've been doing something called serial compression, and that is using basically 2 or more compressors. And the reason why I'm using 2 compressors is mostly for colour. Compression, okay, if we think about what it does in its basic format, okay, compression is there to make the vocal sound smooth the whole way through, okay? So that's making sure the volume, when Georgia belts out those powerful notes, that it doesn't go really loud through the speakers all of a sudden, it makes you jump, or that there's some vocal parts that are so quiet you have to strain to hear what the lyrics are. You want everything to be the same volume throughout. And the more dynamic singers like Georgia, who can sing quietly and then belt notes out, more compression is often needed. Now, I'm using 2 different compressors that are based on analog units. So, you know, these are compressors that you will find in most major recording studios in the world. They were around in the 60s, the 70s, you know, they've been used to death. They add a certain colour to the vocal that you will be familiar with listening to from the tracks that you hear in the charts. Analog based compressors can add what's called warmth. Analog warmth, you probably heard that loads. It's just this nice, lovely, round, warm, smooth sound to vocals. It can also add punch, it can add power, and it can add a bit of creaminess, loads of different flavours. And you know, depending on the vocal, I will swap out compressors depending on what I want. But I do find that these 2 are kind of my default ones, and these are this is my vocal chain template. This is my mixing template. So, you know, these are the 2 ones that I go for the most, particularly this Waves DBX 160, which I've been using a lot over the last few months because it just makes the vocal sound, even though it's an old analog compressor, modern. I don't know what it is, it just like it really works. So these 2 compressors are doing 2 different things. Okay, the majority of the compression is this one, the DBX 160. The job of this compressor is to smooth out the vocal and make it sound just the same level all the way through, and add a bit of colour that I like, a bit of spice. And the Universal Audio LA2, I think this is the silver version that I've used, yeah, it is. This is just adding colour. Okay, it's not going to be doing much of the compressing. Okay, I just like, it's got a very clean but smooth sounding sound. So it's getting used to what compressors you like and what kind of flavors you go for. I've just learned to love the sound of these 2 compressors, so I use them. So let's start. So these are the settings I've already got, so I'm kind of going to take everything back to default. So the difference with this compressor, which is annoying, is that we don't have an attack or release setting, which is very important, but you kind of get away with it with this. But just to kind of demonstrate how important they can be, because there isn't an attack or release on the other one as well. Yes, do you know what I'm going to do? Just so I can teach you guys the importance of attack and release, I'm going to load up a different second compressor, which is the Universal Audio. We'll go for the Tube Tech. This has got attack and release, yeah. Okay, so this is a clean, transparent sounding compressor. Okay, but first of all, we're going to do the DBX. This is the workhorse. So we've got this bit here, compression. This is stereo, so I only need to use these controls here because, you know, these 2 are connected. Now, when you are compressing vocals, you've got something called a ratio, which I'm going to start with just because of the controls here. The ratio is basically how much compression is going to be applied to the vocal. So the threshold on the here, on the left, is in decibels. The threshold sets at which point the compressor will start working. So if the compressor is all the way up here, nothing is going to happen. It's bypassed basically. And as I go round here, it basically means that we have got what's called a low threshold. And let me just explain it visually, because this is absolutely brilliant. Those who've been on my courses will be familiar with this. And I'm going to spend a bit of time, talking about compression, because it's so hard to understand, and one of the most important things to learn in mixing, but particularly with vocals. The FabFilter Pro C2 is a good way to just kind of demonstrate this. So the threshold, I want you to look at these dotted lines here. Okay, so the threshold sets the point at which the compressor starts working. Remember what a compressor is? It squashes, it condenses the vocal, okay, to make it smooth all the way through. So it's got to condense the sound. So threshold basically determines when it's going to kick in, right? So if I set it, say, just whack it here on this line, -30, that means once the volume of her vocal, when she starts singing, once it hits -30 decibels, the compressor will activate and start working. So -30 is like super quiet, isn't it? So she would only have to sing a whisper and the compressor would kick in. If I take the threshold all the way high, all the way up here, whee! So now we're at like, minus whatever it is, -3 decibels. So that means her volume of her vocal has to go all the way up here to -3 decibels before the compressor will work. And this is important because this determines what the sound of the compressor will be like. If you've got a low threshold like this, so the sound's only got to travel up a little bit to this line, your vocal's going to sound squashed. It's going to drain the life out of it. But if it's all the way up here, you're going to have a more natural sounding vocal. So that's the threshold. Now the ratio determines, if the ratio is basically this white line here, see? So let's say I've set it back at -30, the threshold. She starts singing, it gets to this dotted line, and the compressor plugin activates. It's ready to work. Next, it goes to the ratio, and the ratio will tell you how much compression is going to be let through. Now, if I set it at, a ratio of 1, you can see it's all the way up there. That is bypass. No compression is going to be applied. If I do a super high ratio, well, let's do 20 to 1, which is around what most have on maximum on compressors, you can see that the vocal will start, it will hit the threshold, and the ratio will squash that vocal down. See, it'll squash it down rather than letting loads through. See, so again, this really affects the vocal. So what happens with vocals when you're doing modern vocals, whether it's pop, rock, hip hop, trap, whatever it may be, my advice is to start with a ratio of 4:1. Okay, that is kind of what we call a middle ratio. So if we look at the curve here, it's letting through, let me just do this on here. So it lets through a little bit of compression. The threshold is something you have to use your ears for. And the good thing about the FabFilter Pro C2 is that you have a visual guide. So let me show you.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
Okay, here's their vocal, yeah. So you can see big notes there, quiet notes down here on those little mountains. I want my threshold to go below the tops of those mountains.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now. Eyes are only photographing you. I'm barely breathing.
I'm not going to take threshold all the way down there to get that quiet note because it's going to sound squashed. So, that is quite a low threshold actually, but she's a dynamic singer. So if you can see, I've just you see the tops of those, I just make it, that basically means all of this is going to sound level.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
Okay, so, a 4:1 ratio, a threshold of around there. The next is the attack and release. Now, these are so important, the attack and release. They are, let's just say, very fine, nuanced controls. Okay, they can have a big impact, but they are subtle sometimes, and it can be difficult to figure out exactly what you're hearing. On most compressors, you have fast attack and fast release on the left, and as you go around, it gets slower. Yeah, the good way of remembering it is look at the numbers, because it's easier on this because we can see, but other compressors don't have fast written down or slow written down. Look at the numbers. If the numbers are tiny, it's fast. If the numbers are big, it's slow. That's how I remember it. A good way of hearing the effect of the attack and release is by taking everything to extreme. Now, attack basically means how quickly this compressor plugin is going to grab her vocal once she starts singing, and release is how quickly the compressor is going to let go of her vocal once she stops singing. So these things can really make the vocal pump. It can really make the vocal have life and control and smoothness. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to really rack everything to extremes. Okay, and we're going to keep this in the middle. And this is what I do. I start in the center, and then I take the attack all the way to the extreme, to fast, and then all the way to the other extreme, slow. Which sounds better? And then we work back from there. So let's do fast first. Sounding squashed, didn't it? So we already know there with slow, it sounds, you know, a bit more open. That's too squashed. So slow sounds better out of those two for me. So I'm going to work back from slow up to the center and find the optimal setting.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon. Now eyes are only photographing you. I'm barely breathing, praying.
And what I'm listening for is a smoothness. Up here it sounds louder, but it sounds like it's pumping, and you don't want that. Hear it pumping? Don't want that. It sounds smoothest here. Bear in mind the ratio and the threshold are extremes here, so you know it's not going to sound like that when it's finished. It's just so you can hear the difference and the impact of the attack and release. So let's do the same with the release. Let's put it in at the center. Here we go. And we're going to go fast to slow.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon. Now eyes are only photographing.
Okay, straight away you can hear when it goes to a slow release that it is kind of pumping again. It's pumping there.
Up here with the stars.
Nasty. If we go to fast,
Got me floating up here with the
a bit more open, a bit more free, and that's what you want. You don't want anything sounding squashed. I mean, you know, in modern pop, we do have vocals that sound quite controlled and processed, but that is squash, that is pumping effect. You don't want that. So I know that a fast release is optimal. So again, I'm going to work back until the vocal sounds smooth.
got me floating up here with the stars and moon. Now eyes are only photographing you. I'm barely breathing, praying, believing in you. Got me floating up here with the stars and moon. Now eyes are only photographing you.
Okay, around there. So I'm going to take these now back to their other settings. And the threshold was vaguely around.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon. Now.
Okay, now I want you to have a look at this red line here.
Got me floating up.
This is telling me by how much volume I've lost, something called gain reduction, okay? Because we are compressing the vocal. When we compress something, we're squashing it, aren't we? And if you squash something, we're going to lose volume, and we don't want to lose volume. So we use the makeup gain, sometimes called gain or output, to add that volume back. So this bar here is the gain reduction.
Got me floating up here
looking for an average.
Stars and moon now.
Roughly around 5 or 6 decibels we've lost. So we use the gain here to add 5 decibels back. Now this doesn't always equate. Sometimes you think if you've lost 5 decibels and you add 5 decibels back, it will balance out, but it doesn't always. Sometimes it can distort, and you've just got to, you know, use your nous.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
Okay, so now head vocal is sounding smoother, isn't it? So if we take this off.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
Let's turn it back on.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
Sounds smooth now. It's sounding like it's kind of the same all the way through. It's still open and you know, it's not pumping, so that's good. Now, that was just to demonstrate how to use it. I'm not going to use the Pro C2 on this vocal because it doesn't have a colour to it. This is kind of a digital compressor, so it's good for learning compression and it's good for really seeing what's happening in the frequency spectrum. But I'm going to go back to my DBX. Now my compression was at 4:1 ratio, which is the middle, so I'm going to keep that there. The threshold, again, I'm going to move this depending on what I see. So if we have a look at this, this is your gain reduction. So on the fab filter, we saw that big red bar. On analog based compressors, we've got the VU meter, which tells us how much gain reduction, basically how much volume we're losing. Now, as an aim for vocals, you really want to aim for around 5 to 6 decibels of gain reduction. If you start going beyond that, you're going to get a squashed vocal. So, you know, aim, it really varies on the vocal, so I can't give you an exact, but a rough guide for me, I tend to find that I'm compressing vocals around 5 to 6 decibels of gain reduction. So, at the minute, look, minus 20, no, far too squashed.
Got me floating up.
So I'm aiming for it to hit here, this little line.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now. Eyes are only photographing you. I'm barely breathing.
It's to hit that line at its loudest point.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon.
Okay. That'll do. So again, I've lost about 5 decibels of volume. So let's use, it's called makeup gain, makeup. It's called different things on different compressors, which is really unhelpful. But on this, it's called output gain. So again, you know, just go and add 5 decibels, add the volume back.
Got me floating up.
Now, doesn't that sound better than the fab filter already? Doesn't it sound a bit more colourful?
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
Really like that, but you can hear the sibilance, that S is coming up.
Got me floating up here with the stars and...
Yeah, that S is coming up, so you might have to go back to the de-esser. Now, I'm going to bring back my LA2 now that I've demonstrated that. So we're going to go to Universal Audio, Silver, LA2A Silver. Waves also have a version of this. Oh, I wasn't using the silver one before, but I do prefer the silver one. Now look at this, I've only got 2 controls here. I've got gain and peak reduction. Easy, right? So peak reduction is basically our threshold, at which point, you know, this compressor will start working, and gain is adding back the volume that we've lost. That's it. And we've got our VU meter that tells me how much volume I've lost. So there's no ratio, there's no attack, there's no release. It's simple. Now, because the DBX has already compressed the vocal, I'm just using this one for colour. So I don't want to see this needle going above -1. Basically, I don't want to have any more than 1 to 2 decibels of volume loss of gain reduction. I'm just adding it for a bit of colour and a bit of extra compression, but not much. So the more we go round, the more squashed it will get. So let's start over here and see what happens.
Got me floating up here.
We're on naught, nothing's happening at the minute.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now. Eyes are only photographing you.
To watch the distortion.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now. Eyes are only photographing you. I'm barely breathing.
So it's starting to sound, I can hear that creaminess a little bit in her vocal when she sings, that it's like a common part of modern vocals.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now. Eyes are only photographing.
Just take them both off, both compressors, you can hear the difference.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now. Eyes are only photographing you. I'm barely breathing, praying, believing.
Okay, cool. So happy with that. So the next thing that would be in my chain is something called a tonal EQ. So we've started the chain with surgical. I've fixed problems in the frequency spectrum. Dealt with, done, ticked, gone. Okay. But I've used compression and I've used a de-esser. And so what I like to use is something called a tonal EQ, which is basically an analog based EQ plugin. And what this will do is add a bit of tone to the vocals. So it's not necessarily fixing problematic frequencies like the surgical EQ is doing. It is adding colour again, analog colour, and fixing some of the side effects of the compression. Now, everybody knows how much I love the Universal Audio Pultec EQP1A. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant tonal EQ. If you can't afford to get Universal Audio plugin, you can get Waves version of this, the PugeTech EQP1A, and I'm pretty sure from what that Logic's has a compressor built in that is based on the Pultec. However, the best sounding one in my opinion is this. But I've started using two, and I'll tell you why. Well, actually three tonal EQs now in my vocal chain. So we've got this one, the Pultec EQP1A, and this does exactly the same as what this does. Yeah, it's just we can't see the WAV form. So if you look over here, we've got boost and attenuation. Basically means cut. I don't know why they don't call it cut. So boost here, cut here, same thing. And this is in decibels. So if I go like that, I'm boosting by 8, up here, decibels. And down here is the low end, 20 hertz, 30 hertz, 60 hertz, 100. So down here, we've got 20, 30, up to 60, up to 100. So I could, if I wanted to, boost 100 hertz by 5 decibels, okay? And then this here controls the upper frequencies, but from 3 kilohertz, so over here, all the way up to 16. Okay, so I could boost, if I wanted those air frequencies, I could go to 12 kilohertz, boost, maybe 4 decibels or something. And then we've got the bandwidth here, sharp, broad. A sharp cut is like that one there in the surgical EQ. A broad one would be more like the shelf filter that goes over lots of frequencies. So this determines how wide or narrow your cuts are going to be. I tend to leave it around 3 or 4. Now with these Pultecs, you've got to be careful because they add about 3 decibels of volume just by loading it up, and it can make everything sound better before you've even touched it. So I like to go to this here and just go to about 11, 10 o'clock just to get rid of that excess volume. Now, as you can see, this only deals with the low end and the high end. It doesn't do the mids. Now this is the Pultec MEQ 5. This just deals with the mid frequencies. Mid frequencies are important when it comes to your vocals, okay? So I use both of these to kind of get a nice smooth round tone on the vocals. Now sometimes I might mute them and bring in this little sucker. This is the Universal Audio Mag EQ4. If you're after vocals that you really want, like have those air frequencies that make the vocals sparkle and sound breathy and all kinds, this is a brilliant plugin in which to do it. As you can see here, it's this air band here. It goes up to 40 kilohertz, which is insane because look, most of our EQs only go up to 20 kilohertz, don't they? If we went up to 40 here, I mean, I can't even hear past 12 kilohertz. I can't hear the difference between these two controls, and I doubt you would too. So why they've got 40 kilohertz on here, I don't know. But it is brilliant for going to around 5 or 10 kilohertz, and then using this here to add about 2 to 3 decibels of gain, and it adds these lovely sounding air frequencies. So if your vocal is sounding a bit dull and it needs a bit of sparkle, or you just want that modern vocal sound, this is a great plugin. But I tend to start with the Pultecs, so let me do that, and you'll notice you will hear a huge difference with this. I'm just going to go to a different part of the vocal. I mean, what you should be doing when you're mixing the vocal is really go to the most powerful part of the vocal, I would say. So let's go.
I feel it.
Actually, my ears will fatigue if I hear that. In fact, what I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to go to some softer parts here. Okay.
Got me floating up here with...
Okay. Sounding boxy. I don't like it. So I'm going to... Well, first of all, I need to reset everything, don't I?
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
Okay, so female vocals, see 3, 4, 5, maybe 8 kilohertz. These are quite important frequencies to add a bit of brightness to our vocals. You can have a lot of vocal presence between 4 and 5. So let's go to 4 and let's do a little boost. Now these are powerful controls. A little goes a long way.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now. Eyes are only photographing you. I'm barely breathing, pray and believe.
Don't take it too far, otherwise you'll lose a lot of the nice tone. Now, I don't want anything happening on her vocal around 100 or less, because remember, that's where those bassy frequencies are. So what I'm going to do is just do an attenuation of 2, just to get rid of 100 hertz, just to get rid of some of that low end again.
Got me floating up here with...
Okay, let's bring in the middle frequencies. It's going to be quite important. Again, let me just set everything to 0.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon.
What am I doing? I'm loading up the same one. There we go. Did I put that back? Thank you. Okay. Bit more, wasn't it? Yeah, there you go. Okay, cool.
Got me floating up.
Okay, so if we go up around here, the middle, 500, 700, maybe up to 1.5. So if you kind of have, if you're learning EQ, this is a good way of doing it. Just get your surgical EQ out and look along the bottom. Okay, where's 1.5? It's along here. So this is the problem with tonal EQ when you're learning EQ, is that you don't have a visual guide. There's no waveform you can look at. You have to use your ears and nothing but your ears, and it takes a lot of time to develop that kind of ear. So it just comes with practice more than anything. So I'm just going to boost some of the middle frequencies.
Got me
Not boost, sorry, cut what I'm talking about.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now. Eyes are only photographing you. I'm barely breathing, pray and believe.
Basically, these are this control is boosting 200 to 1000, and up here you can boost 1.5 to 5 kilohertz, and in the middle here we can cut any of these frequencies. So we know that she's got a bit of frequencies popping out at this area, so I'm just applying just a little cut. But remember, I'm just really using this for colour, really, bit of colour. Okay.
Got me floating up.
Let's bring in that. Oh, I had it on anyway. It's turning off.
Got me floating up here. Okay. Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
This adds that brightness.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
So I can hear that S's have come out a bit. So if I had time, I would go back to that de-esser and probably cut more of those S's. Now, the next thing that I've done is applied reverb. Now, my reverb has not gone directly on the channel. So if you see all these plugins here, they're all in order. And the order is important. It's really important what order you put your plugins in, right? But my reverbs have gone on something called a bus or an aux channel. So they're basically like shadow channels, and you feed in the reverb. So I'm going to turn on this here, 16, and I'm using the FabFilter Pro R because it's a very lush sounding reverb. It's pretty cool. What you do is, depending on whatever DAW you've got, it should be a very similar process. You there should be something called sends, they'll be called sends, or they'll be called returns, or bus. On our Logic, all we do is we go down here and we go to bus, we click an empty one like that, and then we load up our our reverb, and then we use this little send here, see there, where we dial in the reverb. Now, the benefits of putting your reverb on this kind of shadow bus aux channel and feeding it in via this send is that you are getting kind of what's called like a parallel sound. So you are blending the dry sound of the vocal in with the wet sound of the vocal. So that means for modern vocals, if you listen to modern vocals, they tend to have a lot of reverb on them, but they sound still quite intimate and close to the microphone. That is because they have put the reverb on these aux channels. and fed it in this way. So the reverb is blending the vocals with the instrumental, but it's still retaining those close, intimate sounding dynamics of the vocal. So it's very, very important. If I was to put this reverb directly on this channel with all my compressors and EQs, I'm not getting the dry copy. I'm just getting 100% wet copy of the reverb. So it sounds washier. And, you know, sometimes you want that for that big effect, but, you know, reverbs can really wash out a vocal. So applying it on an aux channel, we get more control and we get a better blend, and actually we get a more modern sound. So what I do before my EQ plugin is I apply an EQ before your reverb, and apply a high pass of up to 200 hertz. By putting the EQ before the reverb, you are affecting just the reverb, not the vocal. If I were to put the EQ after the reverb, I'm EQing the vocal, and I've already EQ'd the vocal. I don't need to do that again. I just want to EQ the reverb, because reverb gives off a lot of low end frequency, a lot of muddiness, and you can imagine a load of reverb on low frequencies. It's going to muddy up your low end. You won't hear your kick or your bass clearly. Total loss of clarity in the mix. By applying EQ before your reverb, you're just dealing with that and making sure that it's clean. So you want to make sure, if you're using an aux channel, bus channel, aux, bus, you know, they mean the same things, just in case if you're wondering. You want to make sure your wetness mix is on 100% for this to work. Space is basically your decay, so that is how long the reverberation is going to go on for. Is it short or is it quite long? Basically like the tail. Let's go.
Got me floating up here with the stars and moon now.
Now it sounds like quite a lot of reverb. It is quite a lot of reverb. But like modern tracks like this, if you listen, there is an increasing use of reverb. So, you know, what I have done, if I press A in Logic, it brings up something called automation, which is a cool manual control where I can do cool things. So if we go down here, if I've done it on here. So yes, if we go to this bus, not that bus, I got rid of the one I wanted, typical. So on my lead vocal channel, I've got an echo. So it's just Logic's built-in echo. You can use any echo, any delay plugin. And I've used automation down here on the vocal. So an echo, I don't want an echo on a vocal the whole way through, because it's going to sound completely crazy. I just want her vocal to echo at the end of certain phrases where there's a gap like this. So if we have a look, watch when this hits. There we go.
And believing in you.
Why is that not activated? Probably not on that one, is it? Oh, you idiot. There you go. Okay, and again. So, okay, watch this. There. So it's very subtle, but the echo isn't on anywhere else other than where these little purple automations are. So again, some gaps in the vocals, and this is what's called a delay or a reverb throw. So this is where there's gaps in the vocals, usually in the verses. You apply automation to bring in a big swell of reverb or a big kind of echoey delay in between those gaps to fill the gaps and make the mix more interesting. So here we can see there is no echo being activated at this point. Then I've basically used, I'll show you how I did it. So your DAW, whatever you use, will have automation. It's a common mixing tool that's in every single DAW. You will have something called a marquee tool. So in Logic, we just press T and then we press R, and then we kind of highlight like this, but we do it down here on the bus. We highlight there where we want to do our automation. Then we go back to the pointer tool, T and T, and then we click, and then it shouldn't happen because that's like that. Hang on, I want to demonstrate this because it's quite important. Let me just do that. That's better. Okay, so same process, and then when we click it and go up, that happens. So now basically what I'm doing here with the echo plugin down here means the echo isn't activated. And if I take it up there, 47% of the wetness is activated, all the way up here, 100% of the wetness. And it's just a good way to really add those nuances to your mix, particularly for EQ. Sorry, not EQ, delay and reverb in particular, those creative effects. But you can do, I mean, I've done whole classes on automation because automation is just so powerful. Underrated mixing tool. But let's see. So it's deactivated here.
Sunrise, yeah, you.
Gone. Yeah, I went back too far. There it is. So we feed it in via the send.
Yeah, you.
And you've got to place it so
You are
carefully.
my sunrise, yeah, you. Yeah, you.
Usually you need to go in like that
You
past
are
the
my
word.
sunrise, yeah, you. Yeah,
So it's just like activating that delay at the end on the last word.
yeah, you.
And it
You are
goes
my
to
fire.
nothing. So automation is powerful, particularly for those kind of effects. Just before we finish, if we go to the backing vocals, I just want to talk through what I've done. So with their harmonies, in fact, with all of them, I think I did it. Yes. So what I've done with her backing vocals is, there's some harmonies, there's some double vocals. I've highlighted all of her backing vocals, and then I go to the stereo out. So again, you can do this in whatever DAW you use. So I go to the stereo out, and they go down to bus, and I send them all to this BGV aux or bus. So basically what that means is all the backing vocals are being sent to a single aux channel where I can process all of the backing vocals as a whole and help glue them together and help just make them sound coherent in the mix, because you don't want the odd stray backing vocal popping out of the mix, because that can easily happen. So I treat these individually if I need to, and then, as I said, they all go to their own backing vocal aux, which comprises of its own EQ, some compression again, a de-esser, and again more tonal EQ. So what I'm basically doing is treating all of the backing vocals as a whole, using the compression to glue all of them together, using the EQ to fix any problems in the vocals as a whole, and to use the tonal EQ as well to just kind of add a bit of top end sparkle to the vocals and a bit of low end smoothness. Sometimes I do use saturation. Saturation is basically distortion. And in my template, as you can see in my backing vocal aux down here, this is part of my template. This is the Waves Magma BB tubes. It's basically, distortion. And it just, distortion is, or saturation is very good at beefing up thin or dull sounding vocals. But a little goes a long way. If you really push the distortion, it's going to distort. So just a few little tweaks like that. And on this, it's got a bass relief, because, it's deemed very often that when you distort things like vocals, having distortion on the bass frequencies, it doesn't sound pleasing. So a bass relief basically means you are distorting just the mid and high frequencies and not the bass. So for vocals, I would turn on the bass relief. For this vocal, you can hear she's got a naturally grainy, powerful vocal. It doesn't sound thin, it doesn't sound lifeless, so I don't need to add saturation. That said, I do apply saturation quite a bit. So these have all kind of been blended together. You can see how I've panned them. The harmonies here, just 24 to the left, 24 to the right on the harmonies. The vocal doubles 38 to the left, 38 to the right. And then, you see here, I'm not going all the way to the left or the right, 63. If we pan too far left or right, we have some problems whereby if your track is played back in mono, you can lose that entire vocal that's been panned. And the wider that you pan your vocals, the more separate they actually sound. You wouldn't think that. You would think that by panning your vocals quite wide that you're going to get a wider sound, and you do, but if you go too far, they become separate from each other. So my advice is very rarely go over minus plus 50 on the pan. So that is like a super quick run through of my vocal chain and kind of how I mix vocals. There's so much that I would do. Besides that, I mean, there's the tuning, there's the cleaning up the vocal, there's pops, clicks, noise. So I clean up those vocals. I put everything in sync with each other, and of course, it's getting the balance right in the mix. But for me, the simplest thing to get your vocal to sit right in the mix, dead easy, right, is you get your fader of the lead vocal and take it all the way down to 0. Okay, just let the instrumental play. Gradually bring in the vocal on the fader until it sounds just a bit too loud where you're thinking it's a bit uncomfortable. Make a note of what volume that's at, and then do the same thing, repeat the process, and take it up till you can just about hear it. Make a note of it. That's the range of your vocal at its optimal setting, somewhere in between those that you've marked, and it's a good way of getting a good vocal balance. But if you're struggling to know whether the vocal is too loud or too quiet, this is what I do. Headphones on, take the volume of your headphones all the way down till you can hardly hear anything, and it brings out the clarity of the vocals so clearly, and it will really tell you whether the vocal is too loud or too quiet. So try that. There's lots of questions that have come through, and so I apologies that I won't get to answer them all. But do feel free to send me a message afterwards if I haven't answered it, and I'll only be too happy to try and help. Is melodyne necessary for rap vocals? If it's a melodic rap, I would say yeah, absolutely. But no, I wouldn't say it's necessary for rap vocals, but it's certainly very necessary that you get your rap vocal bang in time with that beat, which you could do in melodyne or your DAW or Synchro Arts vocal line, whatever it is that you use. What if when you're using a de-esser, it works on some sibilances but makes others sound like or too lispy? Is that where dynamic EQ comes in, or do you use different de-essers? So that I would use automation. So what I would do is basically bring in the automation on it's a volume automation. So you activate in the de-esser on just those really rough sounding S's, and then where the ones that sound okay, I would basically take that automation down. But to be honest, you could use dynamic EQ, but to be honest, most of the time the de-esser does the job. I've very rarely had a problem. What about de-essing in melodyne? Yes, you can de-ess in melodyne, but that that is a whole other yeah, it's just as good, to be honest, but it's a whole other class, that, isn't it? Okay, the order of the plugins on the vocal chain, I've been through basically the order that I showed you guys in the mix. Sometimes my compressor pulls up subtle room noises. Yeah, why does this happen? That is because if you think about it, the compressor is making everything the same volume, right? So that means if there's any little tiny noise in the background, it's going to bring the volume of that up, because if you're kind of setting your threshold up here to make everything smooth and those tiny little noises are all the way down here, your threshold's up there, that sound's going to go all the way up there. So it's going to bring those noises up. That's why you need to do things like gating and doing little cuts and crossfades and things like that to get rid of those noises. Sometimes when doing surgical EQ, we remove harsh frequencies that could contain some cut, rasp character of the voice, for example, in rock vocals. In tonal EQ, is that where we could bring it back? Yeah, absolutely. The tonal EQ there is to really make everything sound smooth at the end. Surgical EQ, it's there to fix things, but EQ shouldn't be your surgical EQ shouldn't be making things sound any worse. Do you make a reverb bus? So yeah, I think I've answered that one. Is the echo plugin on an aux send or the vocal? Do you know what? On that example, it was on my aux send, and I blended it in just because it worked, but it's a bit more subtle that way. However, a lot of the time I do put my delay plugins directly on the channel insert. It just depends what you prefer. Is there an easy way of controlling the overall volume for mixing after volume automation? I know you can trim, but is there a better way? Oh my God, I nearly had a heart attack. I didn't know the dog was in here. I just saw this black thing moving behind me. I thought I had a demon in here. Luna. Right. Okay. So, the overall volume of the mix. I mean, do you mean the vocal or do you mean the overall mix? Because the overall mix, it will be bus compression, which again is a whole different story. Why not do a track stack? Do you know, it always makes me laugh when people say, why not do a track stack? That is just a Logic Pro thing. That is not something you would do in Pro Tools. It's not something you do anywhere else. The way that I've just shown you is the way how you properly mix. So if you're someone who ends up going in the studio with other artists in commercial studios, labels, and you start talking about track stacks, and you have to share your projects with other people, you need to know how to use bus and auxes properly, not just doing a trick that Logic does. But not only that, if you use track stacks versus bus, you're gonna actually have more problems with complicated routing down the line. So yeah, I personally wouldn't use that. Um, okay. Um, Side chain, someone's asking about. Yes, you could. The only time I would ever use side chain compression on a vocal um, would be if it was clashing with, say, the drums, something like the cymbals or something like that. But there's also a possibility of using sidechain on the reverb, which I just wouldn't have had time to do it in this class. But that is whereby the singer is singing, right? And when they're singing, the reverb is ducking out of the way through the sidechain. And then when they stop singing, in between those gaps where I put those echoes, instead, you could have a big swell of reverb coming through. That's a very common modern mixing technique. But yeah, it's a specific sound, and I do use it. I could have used it in that track, but I kind of liked the way it was going anyway. Um, okay. I am skipping some questions just because of time, guys, because there's like, 1,400 people or something ridiculous. Um, Metal vocals, best way to EQ metal vocals that are dynamic. I mean, metal vocals are so powerful. I mean, some incredible singers actually and musicians in metal. It's not really a genre that I'm experienced in, if I'm being honest. But I think with metal vocals, I think it's so important to compress those vocals. And I think with the EQ, you want to keep in those lower frequencies. So where I cut 90 hertz, I would actually go lower than that. I'd probably only go up to about 50 hertz on those metal vocals because you want that growl coming through. But either way, you should follow exactly the same thing that I showed you today. It doesn't matter what genre of music it is. What do you think about the 1176 compressor? Yeah, so the 1176 compressor is brilliant and I love it and I use it most mixes. Now, the only difference with the 1176 compressor, for those that don't know, is the attack and release are the opposite way round, okay? So it's slow on the left, and as you go around, it gets faster. All other compressors, it's fast on the left, slow on the right, yeah? So the 1176 is considered quite an aggressive sounding compressor. So it's best used on drums and bass and those kind of big kind of sounds where you want punch and stuff like that. However, if you do rap vocals, hip hop vocals, rock vocals, metal vocals, using an 1176 instead of, say, the ones that I use today could be good because it has a colour to it that is particularly aggressive and thick and punchy. It's a particular type of colour. So, I'd use it for those genres. I wouldn't use it on a, whispery female vocal on a piano ballad, for example. If you just had to mix vocals with Logic's plugins, I don't know if you're aware, but you can actually get hold of my mix template in Logic Pro. So I've basically recreated that template that you guys seen today using just Logic stock plugins. So it's got all of those plugins ready to go for vocals, for drums, for mastering. So maybe take a look at that because it's just got everything ready to go for you. Yeah, I'll send a link to you guys later so you can take a look if you want. Wave Silk Vocal is good, but it's more of a cheap plugin, isn't it? I think you're just best using your EQ and your compression and getting the sound that you want. Yes, I do use volume automation. I don't use it before my mixing chain though. I tend to use volume automation if there is a problem with so for example on that vocal there with George's vocal, because she's very dynamic, I used compression, but I didn't want, if you apply too much compression it squashes the vocal, doesn't it? And I didn't want that. But there were still some of her vocals that were just a bit quiet in the odd place, so I would use volume automation just to bring those words up, and that's how I use it. Um, with my mixing template in Logic Pro that I just mentioned, I'm currently developing the same template using Pro Tools stock plugins, Ableton stock plugins, FL Studio stock plugins, etc. So those other templates are currently being developed. So yeah, they should be available shortly. So advice for recording vocals in a home studio. So just because of time, etc. So in a couple of months, I'm actually running a course on advanced vocal producing and mixing, which is basically where it goes into even more detail of mixing vocals like I've done today, but it also includes the vocal production. So, like how you can get a good vocal recording at home or in a studio, the microphone choice, the preamp choice, getting the best vocal performance out of the artist, removing pops and clicks, how to tune vocals in Melodyne, how to align vocals, all those kind of things. So that might be helpful for some of you if you want to learn that. But as a very, very quick answer to that, the best thing that you can do when you're recording vocals at home is get a dry a sound as possible. Okay, it doesn't matter if you've got a cheap microphone or a cheap preamp. If your room isn't acoustically treated, that microphone's going to sound like it's £2 worth. Okay, so acoustically treat your room, and that could be just putting a reflection filter behind it, putting up a duvet in the room just to deaden those sounds. It could be a whole range of different things. Do you cut breaths? Depends on the genre. If it's like EDM dance music, like that track, I could easily live without the breaths. If it's a piano ballad, no, the breaths are staying in. So it depends on the genre. Just got to use your judgment on this thing. Is a notch filter only available in Pro Q3? It should be available in any EQ plugin. What do I think of E-mastered? I feel like they just add volume. So, oh, you have poked the beast now, I tell you. So, I'm not a fan of these AI plugins or services. I'm a mastering engineer myself now. I don't know how, but I've ended up over the last few weeks mastering the albums of big name artists. I'm not even advertising myself as a mastering engineer, but I can master and I do master. And I recently did a comparison of a manual mastering process, say against an AI one, and the difference was staggering. You do need a human ear to be able to mix and master. And so, yeah, I think that answers the question about AI stuff. Hire a proper mastering engineer to master your stuff. It can be the difference between an amateur sounding track and a professional sounding track. And yeah, if you want me to master your track, feel free to send it over. Okay, guys, there's loads more questions, but I just can't get through them. So feel free to send it to me afterwards. Just a reminder, this is being recorded. You will get a copy of this recording so you can go over it again, but it might be a couple of weeks because that track hasn't been released yet, and I don't want to put this recording out there when it's not been released by the label. I'm going to send an email later with some links to a couple of the plugins that I mentioned, and that core frequency chart, which you might find helpful, etc. Again, if you've got any questions for me, feel free to send them over. Yes, I can send you contact info for mixing, mastering projects. If you wanted to mix your track or master them, just email me at aubrey@aubrey.whitfield.com. Just tell me a little bit about what you want, and we can get something booked in. I'm going to try and do more of these free masterclasses because I do a lot of paid courses and classes, and I understand not everyone can afford to go on them. So I'm trying to do these when I can. So thank you so much for coming on and listening to me and trusting me with your education. Thank you so much. And yeah, send me a message. Introduce yourself. It'd be great to chat with you. Thanks, guys. I hopefully see you on the courses that are starting in 2 weeks, the advanced mixing and the advanced producing. They're starting in 2 weeks, so I know some of you signed up to that. Thanks, guys. Have a good one. Have a good week. Take care, guys.